Good morning. My name is Kevin Dobbins, and I'm functioning as the Cybersecurity Program Manager for the Department of Veterans Affairs. The following presentation is based on information gathered over the last 8 weeks concerning the security status of the Department of Veterans Affairs. The presentation will highlight the security analyst findings and recommendations for the department. As the final part of a group project for the course CSIA 412 Security Policy Analysis, taught by instructor Amy Harding, the presentation will identify findings and recommendations for our group organization, the Department of Veterans Affairs. The Department of Veterans Affairs has been the victim of multiple security breaches. In an attempt to reduce the potential in the future, a security assessment and recommendations report has been created to identify areas of improvement for the organization. In this presentation, I will be covering the following topics that have been identified as critical for the department: the impact of legislation on the Department of Veterans Affairs, information security standards in use by the Department of Veterans Affairs, the security assessment findings and cybersecurity profile, and lastly, a closing summary and reference to the memorandum I will be sending shortly to senior management after the conclusion of this presentation. As a federal organization, the VA is required to adhere to a certain set of legislation that has been identified by the federal government. The following 4 directives have been identified as critical for the VA and are required to ensure a successful cybersecurity campaign and ensures the protection of confidential information. In the next slides, each of the 4 legislative directives will be discussed and how they apply to the department will be explained. The cybersecurity legislative proposal from 2011 is intended to bring together cyber-related bills that were introduced in the last session of Congress and focuses on improving cybersecurity for the American people, our nation's infrastructure, and the federal government's own network and computers. Protecting the federal government, computers, and networks has 4 parts: management, personnel, intrusion prevention systems, and data centers. In addition to the cyber legislative proposal, the Cybersecurity Act is in place to conduct a top-level assessment of cybersecurity risks to determine which sectors face the greatest immediate risk, and beginning with the sectors identified as having the highest priority, conduct on a sector-by-sector basis, cyber risk assessments of critical infrastructure, establishing a procedure for the designation of critical infrastructure, identifying and develop risk-based cybersecurity performance requirements, and lastly, implementing a cyber response and restoration plan that sets forth the requirements for securing critical infrastructure, including the notification of cyber risks and reporting of significant incidents affecting critical infrastructure. Executive Order 13636 is a legal binding order given by the President which provides direction to federal agencies concerning all aspects of defending and maintaining federal critical infrastructure. In addition, the Presidential Policy Directive PPD 21 is a presidential order enacted to secure both the physical and cyber infrastructure of what is referred to as critical owners and operators. Essentially, these groups are made up of varied organizations and operating models that cover responsibilities, levels of authority, and regulations. Information security standards ensure that agencies all meet the minimum requirements for protecting the confidentiality, integrity, and availability of information. The Department of Veterans Affairs is subject to the 4 standards listed on the screen: NIST Special Publication 853, FIPS 199, FIPS 200, and ISO 27002. NIST Special Publication 800-53 outlines the security and privacy controls required for federal information systems. It is a group of standards consolidated and used not only for the best practice, but also for federal standardization. In addition, FIPS 199 Standards for Security Categorization of Federal Information and Information Systems is a standard that is used for classification of information and is critical for the Department of Veterans Affairs as we hold information from millions of veterans and their families. Another standard, FIPS 200, addresses the specification of minimum security requirements for federal information and information systems. The standard outlines baseline security guidelines that govern the management of federal data and technical architecture in 17 security-related areas. ISO 27002 is a collection of information security guidelines that are intended to help an organization implement, maintain, and improve its information security management. ISO 27002 is an international standard, and while not specifically designed for federal systems, it does provide a good set of information security standards. The following section, the Security Assessment Findings and Cybersecurity Profile, is a summary of the areas that were identified as needing improvement during the recent security assessment. The three areas identified consist of access controls, identification and authentication, and the incident response scenario. Each one of these areas has been identified as weaknesses that contributed to the past security breaches, and each of these areas, when addressed with the recommendations that will be provided, will improve the cybersecurity profile for the Department of Veterans Affairs. Access controls are security features implemented to protect access to information. Access controls ensure that only authorized users and systems can access information. The VA needs to improve on the following areas. AC1, which is a family control, access control policy and procedures. In short, this is determining who has access to information. A suggestion would be reviewing the current policies and classification of information, as well as implementing controls to restrict unauthorized access. Secondly, ensuring that family control AC5, separation of duties, is implemented throughout the organization will ensure that individuals who no longer require access will not have access and that access will be removed, as well as ensuring that no individual will have total access to information. An example would be changing roles within the department. An individual changing roles would not be allowed to have the same access based on the role that he previously had. Identification and authentication are two aspects of security that are used to identify individuals and systems for access, and based on the identity, provide them access to the systems. Identification can be in the form of a username, a system ID, and once that information is provided, the act of authentication now takes place. The authentication is a manner of confirming the validity of the identification provided. The following controls, IA1, Identification and Authentication Policy and Procedures, and IA3, Device Identification and Authentication, are required to protect information. Within the VA, these controls need to be implemented in a more secure manner. The primary goal of the incident response is to address an issue in a manner that limits the damage and reduces the recovery time and/or cost. The VA uses Reference Handbook 6500.2 to identify their incident response responsibilities. Security controls defined by IR1, Incident Response Policy and Procedures, and IR4, Incident Handling, ensure that the agency has procedures in place to identify and mitigate any potential security incident. In the past, this was an area of concern for the VA, and based on this assessment, this area is in scope for recommendation of improvements. Based on the findings identified in this presentation, a memorandum was created that identified the need for a separate security project to focus on the implementation of the required family controls. The project will fall under the responsibility of the new Cybersecurity Program Manager and has an estimated completion date of October 31st, 2015. In addition, the Cybersecurity Program Manager would be responsible for providing weekly status feedback in the form of project review boards and deliver milestone achievement presentations to the senior management of the Department of Veterans Affairs. In closing, focusing on a cybersecurity program and implementing a secure environment to protect information and to ensure the confidentiality and integrity of that information is preserved is critical for the Department of Veterans Affairs. I personally feel by initiating the security assessment and the associated projects to address the 3 areas identified as a problem area, the VA will ensure that the security awareness and profile of the agency will be improved. In addition, the cybersecurity program will take the lead in ensuring that the Department of Veterans Affairs is compliant with all regulations as well as strives to ensure the best cybersecurity for our customers, the United States of America veterans, of which I also fall under. Thanks for your time, and I'm available after the presentation for questions. In addition, a memorandum has been sent to specific individuals with additional details concerning the projects. So ensure that you check your email boxes, and thanks again for your time. Thank you, Kevin Dobbins.